My boyfriend called my pregnancy disgusting in front of everyone we knew. He was revolted by the reality of what my body was doing to create his child. So, I made a promise to myself and to him. He would never have to hear another revolting detail again. Not about the doctor's appointments, not about the life-threatening complications, not even when I went into labor with his son. The air in the Cypress Creek Country Club was thick with the scent of money, lilies, and muted congratulations. It was the baby shower I never wanted, in a place I could never feel comfortable. Jerry, my partner of 4 years, had insisted on it. He loved the darkwood paneling, the manicured golf course sprawling outside the panoramic windows, and the feeling of performance that came with it. I just felt like an imposter, a fragile vessel for a life that was already making my body feel alien. I was clutching a glass of sparkling cider, trying to ignore the way the tight silk of my maternity dress chafed against my skin when my cousin, Chloe, leaned in close. Her voice was a conspiratorial whisper against the polite chatter. "Hey, are you okay? Your eyes are looking really intense." She gestured vaguely at her own face. I forced a small, weary smile. "Oh yeah,
I'm fine.
just a rough morning." I took a sip of the cider, the bubbles doing nothing to settle the lingering nausea. I was throwing up so violently this morning that I burst a bunch of blood vessels in my eyes. The doctor said it's normal, just dramatic. I meant for it to be a light-hearted, self-deprecating comment, another weird anecdote on the bizarre journey of pregnancy. But Jerry, who had been holding court with his college buddies a few feet away, overheard. His head snapped in my direction, his face contorting into a mask of pure disgust. "Shut up," he hissed, his voice cutting through the room like a shard of glass. The polite murmurings of conversation died instantly, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable silence. Every eye in that opulent room swiveled to us. "Just shut up. Nobody wants to hear about your bloody eyes and your vomit. Can you go 5 minutes without making your pregnancy everyone else's problem? It's revolting." The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. My cheeks burned with a heat that had nothing to do with hormones. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, dissecting my discomfort, my shame. Jerry's sister, Lisa, a woman who is usually his staunchest defender, took a hesitant step forward. "Jerry, come on, that's a bit harsh."
He wasn't having it.
He doubled down, his voice rising in pitch and volume, his indignation fueling him.
What?
"Are we all supposed to sit here and pretend this stuff isn't completely gross?" Yesterday, she was going on and on about how her nipples are leaking. Last week, it was some horrifying story about discharge and the new cellulite on her thighs. "We get it. You're pregnant. Your body is doing a bunch of nasty things. Keep it to yourself." His mother, a woman who normally radiated a quiet composure, let out a sharp gasp. "Jerry Michael," she said, her tone laced with a rare and potent disappointment. "She is carrying your child." He scoffed, throwing his hands up in a gesture of exasperated disbelief. "And that means I have to get a play-by-play of every single disgusting thing happening inside her? This is supposed to be a happy day, a celebration, and she's over here talking about bloody eyeballs and making me lose my appetite." That was it. Something inside me, a wire that had been stretched taut for months, finally snapped. I carefully placed my untouched cider on the table beside me, the crystal clinking softly in the cavernous silence. I looked directly at him, my gaze level and cold. "You know what, Jerry?" I said, my voice clear and steady, devoid of the tears that were threatening to spill. "You are absolutely right. My apologies. I won't disgust you with any more updates." His expression shifted from anger to surprise, and then, slowly, a smug sense of satisfaction spread across his face. He thought he'd won. Finally, he breathed out, a relieved smile touching his lips. "Thank you.
See?
It's not that hard to keep all that private." He turned back to his friends, ready to resume his performance, completely oblivious to the fact that he hadn't just won an argument. He had fundamentally and irrevocably severed a connection. In that moment, surrounded by pastel decorations and untouched canapes, I made a silent vow. He wanted privacy? He would get it. He would get so much privacy, he would drown in it. The silence he craved would become his own personal hell. 2 days later, the world was gray and drizzling, a perfect mirror for my mood. I was carefully pulling on a pair of stretchy pants, preparing for my 20-week anatomy scan, when Jerry walked into the bedroom, looking refreshed from his morning workout. "Hey, what time is the appointment?" "I'll clear my afternoon and drive us," he said casually, as if the scene at the country club had been a bad dream. I didn't look at him. "Oh, I'm going alone," I stated, my voice flat. "I wouldn't want to subject you to any more disgusting pregnancy stuff." His face crumpled in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "This is the big one. We find out if it's a boy or a girl today." I finally turned to face him, my expression unreadable. "Yes, we do. And that involves a stranger," the technician, slathering my stomach in cold gel and pressing a plastic wand all over it while we stare at a grainy, black and white image of our baby's private parts on a monitor. They also measure the heart chambers, the kidneys, the brain, all sorts of pretty gross internal medical stuff. "I'm just respecting your wishes." His brow furrowed. "That's different. That's about the baby." "No, it's not," I countered, my voice dangerously quiet. "You made your position crystal clear. All details related to this pregnancy revolt you. I'm honoring that boundary." I grabbed my purse and walked out, leaving him standing in the middle of our bedroom. I took an Uber to the clinic, the rain streaking down the windows. When Jerry showed up 20 minutes later, his hair plastered to his forehead, I was already in the waiting room. I saw him through the glass doors and simply shook my head. He tried to argue through the intercom, but I buzzed the receptionist and told her he wasn't on my approved visitor list. He was forced to wait outside, pacing under the awning like a caged animal. The next day, his mother called him. I could hear his muffled voice from the living room, and then a sudden, joyous shout. He burst into the bedroom a moment later, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. "My mom just called me," he said, his voice trembling with a joy that was quickly being overshadowed by rage. "She said we're having a boy. She said he looks perfect. And she also said I'd better have already apologized to my fiancé." He glared at me. "You told me the doctor said it was too early to tell the gender, that we'd have to wait a few more weeks." I calmly folded a tiny onesie I'd bought after the appointment. "I only said that because I didn't want to disgust you. Didn't want you losing your appetite again," I replied, echoing his own cruel words back at him. "You can't keep the gender of our child from me," he roared. I looked up, my eyes meeting his in the mirror. "I'm not keeping anything, Jerry. I am protecting you from revolting pregnancy talk."
Just like you asked.
The war of attrition continued. When friends and family asked about baby names, I became a fountain of enthusiastic discussion, but only when Jerry was out of earshot. Our friends knew we were leaning toward James. His own parents were privy to my fondness for Thomas. His brother, Mark, was the only one I told about William. Jerry grew increasingly frantic, feeling the walls of his self-imposed exile closing in. "Why won't you tell me the names you're considering?" he pleaded one night, his voice laced with a desperation that gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. "Because discussing our baby's name would require me to mention the pregnancy," I explained patiently, as if to a child. "And that topic is off limits. Remember?" "This is insane," he yelled, running his hands through his hair. "No," I said softly. "This is literally what you demanded." At 28 weeks, the pregnancy took a dangerous turn. My body, which Jerry found so distasteful, began to betray me in terrifying ways. My feet and ankles swelled to an unrecognizable size. When I pressed a finger into the skin, the indentation remained, a pale pit like memory foam. Dark, spidery spots began to dance in my peripheral vision, blurring the edges of the world. I knew these were red flags, but the person who should have been my first call was the last person I could trust. So, I went to the hospital alone. After a series of tests, the doctor's face was grave. Preeclampsia. I was admitted immediately for round-the-clock monitoring. From my hospital bed, I sent out a mass text, a carefully curated list of family and friends. "Have been admitted to the hospital with preeclampsia. Baby and I are being monitored closely. We'll keep you posted. I made sure to exclude one name from the list, Jerry. He found out, as I knew he would, through the grapevine. His brother called him, confused and concerned. Mark, what's going on? Why aren't you at the hospital with her? Jerry's subsequent call to me was frantic, a torrent of panicked questions. You're in the hospital, and you didn't tell me? Medical details about the pregnancy are TMI. I recited, my voice a monotone. You said so yourself. Besides, I couldn't risk it. You might get so grossed out by my swollen body and high blood pressure that you'd call me disgusting again, and the stress from that would definitely make me lose the baby. A choked silence met me on the other end of the line. For the first time, I think he started to understand the chasm that had opened between us. When the doctor informed me that the complications were too severe and they needed to schedule a C-section for 36 weeks, I once again initiated my information lockdown. I told my family, his family, our friends, everyone who had shown me an ounce of compassion. The only person left in the dark was the father of my child. His sister, Lisa, was the one to break the news to him. The baby is coming next Tuesday, Jerry. You should probably know that. His call came less than a minute later. Tuesday? You're having our son on Tuesday? He practically screamed into the phone. Yep, I said, picking at a loose thread on my hospital gown. Didn't want to disgust you with all the gory details, them cutting through 7 layers of my abdomen and pulling a baby out of my uterus. Sounds pretty revolting. I need to request time off work, he sputtered. Why? I asked with feigned innocence. You won't want to be there. It's the ultimate gross pregnancy event. There will be blood, amniotic fluid that apparently looks like chicken soup, and then they have to deliver the placenta, which I've heard looks like a slab of raw liver. Definitely an appetite killer. His mother tried to intervene. She arranged a dinner at their house the night before I was scheduled to go back to the hospital. Jerry sat across from me, his eyes red-rimmed, looking like a man on the verge of collapse. He knows he messed up, his mom pleaded on his behalf.
He said he's sorry.
But he needs to be there for the birth of his son. I just shrugged, taking a slow bite of my mashed potatoes. He said pregnancy updates make him sick. Birth is the ultimate pregnancy update. I didn't mean the birth. Jerry protested, his voice cracking. You said every disgusting thing happening to her. I corrected him gently.
Birth is exactly that.
It's the grand finale. The morning of my C-section, the world outside was quiet and dark. I moved through our house like a ghost while Jerry was in the shower. I called an Uber, my hospital bag already waiting by the door. As the car pulled away from the curb, I sent him a single text message. Having the baby now. Don't want to disgust you with the details, so I'll talk to you later. When I woke up, the world was a bleary, morphine-laced haze. The first thing I saw was Jerry, standing by my bedside, his eyes wide and wild. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. You didn't tell me you were leaving, were the first words out of his mouth. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. This, right here, this is the problem, Jerry. I have just had our son. I just woke up from major, life-threatening surgery. And your very first words are about you.
Meh.
His face went pale, the blood draining from it as the weight of his selfishness finally, crushingly, landed on him. I missed my son's first moments, he whispered, his voice hollow with a grief he had authored himself. It's okay, I told him, my voice soft but unforgiving. I'm sure it all looked revolting anyway. I'm his father, he said, as if the title alone should grant him absolution. His father, who finds the very reality of pregnancy disgusting. I was just protecting you from TMI. Just then, a nurse bustled in to check my vitals. She took one look at Jerry's stricken face and then at me, a look of dawning comprehension on her own. Oh, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. You're the one who thinks pregnancy is gross.
Yeah, she told us all about it.
We've never had a father who didn't want updates before. That's a new one for us. The public shame was more than he could bear. Jerry stumbled back, falling into the visitor's chair. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for something I couldn't give him. He looked over at the empty space in the room where our son was supposed to be. Then, with a sudden, jerky movement, he stood up. You know what? he said, his voice barely a whisper. And then he started walking toward the door. Jerry, I called out, a flicker of panic cutting through my exhaustion. Jerry. He didn't stop. He didn't even turn around. The door swung shut behind him, leaving me alone in the sterile white room with the rhythmic, indifferent beeping of the machines. The nurse came over, her expression a mixture of pity and disgust. She adjusted my bag, shaking her head. Men, she muttered under her breath, can dish it out, but they can't handle the consequences. I tried to push myself up, but a bolt of white-hot pain from the C-section incision shot through my torso, forcing me back against the pillows. The nurse helped me adjust the bed and then, seeing the tears welling in my eyes, she simply placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. I stared at the empty doorway, at the space where the father of my child should have been, and felt a profound and desolate loneliness. 20 agonizingly long minutes passed before they finally wheeled a clear bassinet into my room. There he was, my son, wrapped in a standard-issue blue and white striped blanket. The nurse lifted him with a practiced gentleness and placed him in my arms. He was so impossibly small, his tiny, perfect fingers curling and uncurling, grasping at the air. His face was a scrunched-up, wrinkled map of an old man, and he was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. As I held him, my phone began to buzz on the bedside table. It was Jerry's mom. I answered, my voice thick with emotion. She was talking a mile a minute, her words a frantic jumble. What happened? Jerry just showed up at my house. He's sobbing uncontrollably and won't tell me what's wrong. I didn't mince words. He walked out on me, I said, my voice flat and cold. He walked out of my hospital room right after I woke up from surgery. The line went silent for a long, heavy moment. When she spoke again, her voice was choked with tears. I'm on my way. An hour later, a woman with a kind face and a clipboard knocked gently before entering. She introduced herself as a hospital social worker. She pulled a chair up to my bed and began to ask me gentle, probing questions about my life at home. My support system. Did I feel safe? Did I have people who could help me? The floodgates opened. I started from the beginning, from the humiliating moment at the baby shower, and told her everything. She listened patiently, taking meticulous notes as I recounted how I had systematically shut Jerry out and how he had ultimately missed the birth of our son because of his own cruelty. She nodded, her expression empathetic. Emotional abuse during pregnancy is a very serious issue, she said softly. We need to make sure you and the baby have a proper, supportive environment to go home to. Jerry's mom arrived while the social worker was still with me. She froze in the doorway, her eyes locking onto the tiny bundle in my arms. A fresh wave of tears streamed down her face as she came over to the bed. She reached out a trembling hand to touch his tiny fingers. He told me everything, she whispered, her gaze shifting to meet mine. He told me what he did, what he said. I am absolutely, utterly disgusted with my own son. She looked back at the baby, her heart in her eyes. Can I still be a part of his life? Even if you and Jerry, even if you don't work things out? Of course you can, I said without hesitation, and carefully transferred my son into his grandmother's waiting arms. The social worker watched the tender exchange, making a few more notes before promising to check back in the next day. The second day in the hospital was a relentless assault on my phone. A constant barrage of texts from Jerry, a chaotic pendulum swinging between groveling apologies and furious accusations. One minute he was begging to see the baby, promising he'd do anything to fix what he'd broken. The next, he was accusing me of maliciously keeping his son from him. Then it would swing back to desperate apologies. The nurse, seeing the stress on my face, gently took my phone and showed me how to activate the Do Not Disturb function. You need to focus on healing, she said sternly, not on his drama. The hospital was clear. I couldn't be discharged until they could confirm I had a safe place to go and adequate help at home. I was faced with a stark choice: return to the house I shared with Jerry or find somewhere else. The decision was made for me when Lisa, Jerry's sister, called. I know he's staying at Mom's, she said, her voice full of an empathy I was profoundly grateful for. Let me come stay with you for the first week. You'll need help. You can't do it all on your own. I accepted immediately. I couldn't lift anything heavier than my son, and the thought of navigating those first few days alone was terrifying. On the day of my discharge, as the nurse was finalizing my paperwork, a call came up from security at the main desk. Jerry was downstairs. He had a massive bouquet of flowers and was demanding to be led up to the maternity ward. But he wasn't on my approved visitor list. They wouldn't let him pass without my permission. I told them no. A few minutes later, the nurse brought up the flowers he'd left at the desk. Tucked inside was a note. I didn't read it. I simply shoved it into the bottom of my bag with the rest of the discharge papers. Lisa drove me home, her presence a quiet, steady comfort. I sat in the back, watching my son sleep in his car seat. Walking back into my own house felt surreal, like stepping into a life that was no longer mine. The nursery, which Jerry and I had so happily painted a soft, neutral yellow just a few months ago, felt like a museum exhibit of a failed relationship. Lisa was a godsend. She helped me up the stairs, my stomach muscles screaming with every step. She had already moved into the guest room and stocked the fridge with groceries. She made sure Jerry knew, in no uncertain terms, that he was not to come by the house. Those first few days were a blur of pain, exhaustion, and overwhelming love. Everything hurt. On the third day, my milk came in, and my chest felt like it was filled with hot, jagged rocks. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, crying from the sheer physical agony of it, trying to figure out how to work the breast pump, when my phone buzzed. It was another text from Jerry, another plea to see the baby, another promise that he would only stay for a few minutes. I texted back a single, cold sentence. I need to focus on healing. I will contact you when I am ready. 5 more messages followed in rapid succession. I deleted the notifications without reading them. The first pediatrician appointment was looming. Jerry's name was on the insurance, a bureaucratic tie I couldn't sever. I had to text him the basic information. The date, the time, the address. Nothing more. No updates on the baby's health. No details about my own agonizing recovery. He responded almost instantly, asking if he could come, if he could drive us. I have already arranged transportation with your sister, I replied. You do not need to come. He continued to text. But I had turned off my read receipts. I only responded to the things that were absolutely necessary for our son's logistical care. At the appointment, the waiting room was a chaotic symphony of crying babies. I juggled filling out paperwork with one hand while holding my son with the other. When the doctor came in, she started asking about family medical history. She needed Jerry's side. Genetic conditions, allergies, a history of heart disease. I realized with a sinking feeling that I couldn't completely excise him from our son's life. He was a part of his DNA. I texted him, asking for the necessary information. He sent back paragraphs, a detailed medical history of his entire family, followed by another offer to come to future appointments. I ignored it. The doctor must have noticed my hands were shaking. Do you have a good support system at home? She asked kindly. I gave her the brief, sanitized version of the situation. She handed me a stack of pamphlets for single-parent resources and postpartum support groups. That evening, Jerry's mom called. I know you're doing it all alone, she said. Let me help with the night feedings. She showed up at 9 p.m. with an overnight bag and, without being asked, took the 3 a.m. feeding, letting me get a precious few hours of uninterrupted sleep. She never mentioned Jerry. She just focused on the baby, on me, on helping. On the 5th day home, I finally brought myself to open the envelope from the flowers. The note was 3 pages long, a rambling, desperate confession. He acknowledged the cruelty of his words at the shower, admitted he understood why I had shut him out. He wrote about his shame, about how he had failed me when I needed him most. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. Words were meaningless. Actions were everything. A few days later, Lisa casually mentioned, while changing the baby, that Jerry had started seeing a therapist. Twice a week. Mom made it a condition of him staying at her house, she explained. She's even paying for it to make sure he actually goes. This surprised me. Jerry had always been so dismissive of therapy, calling it a crutch for weak people. Then, I woke up with a raging fever. 101 degrees. A jolt of terror went through me. An infection from the incision. His mom drove me to urgent care while Lisa stayed with the baby. The doctor confirmed it, a small infection where a stitch hadn't dissolved properly. She prescribed a strong course of antibiotics and asked about my stress levels. Stress can significantly slow the healing process, she warned. I admitted that things were complicated. She wrote me a referral for a therapist who specialized in postpartum issues and relationship trauma. The antibiotics worked, but I was left feeling fragile and utterly drained. 2 weeks after giving birth, Lisa handed me another thick envelope from Jerry. Inside was a formal letter, the language stilted and unnatural. It was clearly written with the help of his new therapist. It was a request for a mediated discussion to establish a co-parenting agreement. It was filled with words like accountability, repair, and taking responsibility for harmful behaviors. It didn't sound like Jerry at all. I set the letter aside and called a family law office. The lawyer was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who listened to my entire story without interruption, her pen scratching across a yellow legal pad. His behavior at the shower constitutes emotional abuse, she stated when I was finished. His pattern of absence and his actions at the hospital will not look good in a custody hearing. She helped me construct a detailed timeline, a meticulous record of every humiliation, every missed appointment, every desperate text message. Laid out chronologically, the pattern was damning. You have strong grounds for primary physical custody with supervised visitation, if that's the route you want to take, she advised. She recommended I wait until I was at least 4 weeks postpartum before agreeing to any mediation. I needed to be physically healed enough to endure a long, stressful meeting. I relayed the message through Lisa. Jerry immediately started texting me, pushing for an earlier date. I didn't respond. I just forwarded the messages to my lawyer, adding them to the growing file. His mom continued to be my rock, coming over for night feedings 3 times a week, never once pressuring me to forgive her son. His brother asked to visit his nephew, making it clear he would come alone. He showed up with a stuffed elephant and a quiet respect for my boundaries. My cousin Chloe started coming by every few days with groceries, holding the baby so I could take a long, hot shower. "You're so strong," she told me one afternoon. Most people would have just cried. You protected yourself. At 4 weeks postpartum, I had my first therapy session. I spent the entire hour sobbing, grieving the partnership I thought I had, the vision of motherhood that had been stolen from me. Jerry's cruelty wasn't just mean words, my therapist said gently. It was emotional abuse that put you and your baby at risk. What you are feeling is grief, and it is entirely valid. When I got home from that session, Lisa was waiting with yet another delivery from Jerry. An envelope containing a certificate. He had enrolled in a 12-week parenting program. A tiny crack appeared in the wall of my anger, but then I remembered his face at the baby shower, the sneer in his voice as he called me revolting. I placed the certificate in the folder with everything else. The mediation was finally scheduled for 6 weeks postpartum. I drove myself to the mediator's office, my incision a dull ache. Jerry was already there. He looked awful. He'd lost weight, and there were dark, cavernous circles under his eyes. The mediator, a calm, professional woman, directed him to listen first. I spoke for nearly an hour, my voice shaking at first, then growing stronger as I laid out the anatomy of my pain. I told them about the burst blood vessels, the lonely anatomy scan, the terrifying trip to the hospital with preeclampsia. I explained that I couldn't trust him with my medical care, with my vulnerability, after he had made it so clear that my pregnant body disgusted him. And Jerry sat there. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to defend himself. When I finished, the mediator turned to him. He apologized. It was a simple, unadorned apology, free of the defensive justifications I had been expecting. He said he was selfish and cruel. He said he had let his own squeamishness override his basic compassion for the person he was supposed to love. He admitted that he had made a hard and scary time in my life infinitely worse by making me feel ashamed. Then he pulled out a notebook. He outlined his plan: therapy twice a week, the 12-week parenting class, for which he showed the receipts. He had a stack of books on his lap: The Postpartum Husband, Traumatic Birth, The Fourth Trimester. He said he knew words were meaningless now. He wanted to prove his commitment through consistent, long-term action. He wasn't asking for my forgiveness. He was just asking for a chance to show he could be a father. The mediator helped us draft an initial agreement. Supervised visits. 1 hour, twice a week, at his mother's house. Jerry nodded and wrote it all down, not arguing a single point. His compliance was, frankly, shocking. The first visit was torture. I packed the diaper bag 3 times, my hands shaking. I drove to his mom's house and handed over my son, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't leave. I sat in my car, parked down the street, for the entire hour, staring at my phone, my stomach in knots. His mom sent me pictures. Jerry holding the baby, his large hands surprisingly gentle, his head properly supported. He was looking down at our son with an expression of such profound wonder and terror that it made my chest ache. When the hour was up, he handed the baby back to me without a word, respecting the boundary. The second visit was the same. By the third, I managed to drive home instead of lurking down the street. After 3 successful visits, he sent a request through the mediator. Could we gradually increase the time? I agreed to 2 hours, but insisted the supervision remain in place until he had completed all his programs. He accepted the terms without protest. At my 6-week postpartum checkup, the doctor cleared me for all normal activities. "How are you doing emotionally?" she asked. I confessed that co-parenting with the man who had traumatized me was harder than the physical recovery from surgery. Lisa told me Jerry hadn't missed a single therapy session. He'd even started journaling. At 2 months, he requested, again through the mediator, to attend the next pediatrician appointment. I agreed, but with strict boundaries. He could listen, but I made all the decisions. He showed up and sat quietly in a chair against the wall, taking notes, asking intelligent questions about developmental milestones. He didn't challenge me on anything. After, he simply said, "Thank you for letting me be here," and left. His mom told me later how proud she was of me. She also apologized. "I failed him," she said, her eyes filled with tears. "I never taught him how to properly respect women. I always made excuses for him. Watching you set these firm boundaries, it's teaching me, too." Slowly, I started to feel more confident. His absence in those first few weeks, as painful as it was, had forced me to trust my own instincts. I was a good mother. My son was thriving. At 10 weeks, he sent a written summary of what he'd learned in his parenting class. It was 12 pages long. It covered secure attachment theory, the effect of maternal stress hormones on a fetus, and the long-term psychological damage of public humiliation. He had printed out medical studies on preeclampsia, highlighting the mortality rates. He understood, now, that I could have died. My therapist pointed out that my anger, while valid, was also exhausting. Co-parenting isn't about punishing Jerry, she reminded me. It's about doing what is best for your son. At 3 months, we attempted the first unsupervised visit. 1 hour, at a coffee shop with large windows. I watched from my car in the parking lot, my heart in my throat. I saw him carefully feed our son a bottle. I saw him walk him around when he got fussy. Exactly 1 hour later, he was standing outside, ready to hand the baby back. That night, he sent a photo. Our son asleep on his chest. The caption read, "Thank you for trusting me." Something inside me shifted. It wasn't forgiveness.
Not yet.
But it was the first crack in the ice. His mom found medical textbooks on preeclampsia and C-section recovery all over his apartment. He broke down completely when he read about HELP syndrome, she told me. He finally understands how close you came. We started parallel parenting at a baby swim class. We entered the pool from opposite sides, focusing only on our son, who squealed with delight in the water. For 30 minutes, we were just 2 parents, united in the joy of our child. At 4 months, he completed the parenting program. The instructor sent me a letter. In 15 years of teaching, she wrote, I have never had a student more engaged or committed to genuine change. His remorse is authentic. We met with our lawyers to finalize the custody agreement. He signed everything I proposed without argument. He agreed to pay 20% above the state-mandated child support, revealing he'd taken a second job at a warehouse to cover all the baby's expenses and start a college fund. Then one afternoon during a handoff, it happened. As I was passing the car seat to him, our son heard Jerry's voice and his little head whipped around. He broke into a gummy smile and reached his tiny arms out for his father. My heart simultaneously broke and healed in that single, perfect moment. I watched Jerry's face crumple with emotion as he took our son into his arms. Whatever had happened between us, whatever pain still lingered, our child loved his father. We started using a co-parenting app, streamlining communication. The next time he came for a pickup, he looked me directly in the eye for the first time in months. I know you may never forgive me, he said, his voice thick with a sincerity that was new. But I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life being the father our son deserves. At the 6-month pediatrician appointment, we sat in the exam room together. The doctor commented on how well our son was developing. He's a lucky boy, she said, smiling at us, to have two parents who so clearly love him. Jerry and I made eye contact over our son's head, and we shared a small, genuine smile. It was strange. It was fragile, but it was real. Jerry started volunteering at a pregnancy resource center, teaching classes for expectant fathers. He used his own story, his own monumental failures, as a cautionary tale. It was part of his accountability work, his therapist's idea. 6 months had passed since the day my life shattered on the manicured lawn of that country club. My son was happy and healthy. Jerry was showing up, consistently and humbly. His family had become my family. The life I had was nothing like the one I had planned, but it was a life built on hard-won respect, ironclad boundaries, and the tentative, fragile hope of growth. It was my life, and it was working.